A song comes on that you haven't heard in 15 years. For a moment, you're not standing in your kitchen anymore. You're somewhere else entirely, some version of a summer, a friendship, a version of yourself that no longer exists. Your chest tightens in a way that isn't quite sadness and isn't quite joy. You call this nostalgia, and you treat it like a pleasant accident of memory. But the real answer is far stranger. Nostalgia isn't a malfunction of memory. It's a tool your brain built on purpose, and it's been quietly protecting you for longer than you realize. Your brain did not evolve to store the past for entertainment. It evolved to use the past as a resource. For most of human history, memory wasn't a luxury. It was survival infrastructure. Remembering which berries made your cousin sick, remembering which cave flooded during the last storm, remembering who helped you when things went wrong and who didn't. But somewhere inside that practical memory system, something else was quietly built alongside it. A mechanism that didn't just store facts, it stored feelings, and it learned to reach backward, deliberately, whenever the present moment became difficult. That mechanism is nostalgia, and for a long time, psychologists thought it was closer to a disorder than a gift. The word itself was coined in the 17th century by a Swiss physician describing homesick soldiers, and for centuries afterward, nostalgia was treated as something close to an illness. Doctors listed it alongside melancholy and grief. It was seen as a weakness, a failure to adapt to the present. Then, starting in the early 2000s, a psychologist named Constantine Sedikides, working with his colleague Tim Wildschut at the University of Southampton, began systematically studying what nostalgia actually does to people, rather than assuming it was a problem to be treated. What they found overturned decades of assumptions. Sedikides and Wildschut discovered that nostalgia, far from being a sign of poor coping, was something people reach for specifically during difficult moments, and that reaching for it consistently made things better. People who engaged in nostalgic reflection reported feeling more socially connected, more optimistic about the future, and more convinced that their lives had meaning, even when the nostalgic memory itself was bittersweet or involved loss. Here's the part that should surprise you. Nostalgia isn't triggered randomly. It shows up on cue, almost like a first responder, precisely when you need it most. Researchers found that people become measurably more nostalgic during moments of loneliness, uncertainty, and stress, not during your best days, during your hardest ones. When the present feels unstable, your mind doesn't just drift to the past by accident. It goes looking for it, the way you'd reach for a specific tool for a specific job. Think about what that memory actually gives you when it arrives. It isn't just a replay of an old scene, it's evidence. Evidence that you have been loved before, that you have belonged somewhere before, that difficult periods in your life have ended before and been followed by good ones. In a moment when your brain isn't sure the future holds any of that, nostalgia hands it proof from the past instead. The psychologist Krystine Batcho, who has spent decades researching nostalgia's effects, found that people who scored higher in nostalgic tendency were not more depressed or backward-looking, as the old theory predicted. They were often more resilient. Nostalgia, in her research, functioned less like an escape and more like an anchor, something that let a person feel steady enough in who they were to face what came next. And here's where the story gets even stranger. Nostalgia doesn't just comfort your mind, it appears to reach into your body. In 2012, researchers led by Xinyu Zhou ran a study testing something that sounds almost too strange to be real. They found that people who were made to feel nostalgic reported feeling physically warmer and were more tolerant of cold temperatures than people who weren't. Nostalgia, in other words, wasn't just a mental comfort. It behaved in some measurable way like an internal heater summoned by the mind to help the body cope with an unpleasant environment. Think about why a trait like that would survive millions of years of evolution, a tool that reliably calmed the nervous system during isolation, that reinforced social bonds by reminding you who you belong to, that convinced you difficult stretches end, and that even helped regulate your physical experience of hardship, would have been extraordinarily valuable to a species that regularly faced harsh winters, displacement, and loss. Nostalgia wasn't sentimentality. It was a survival strategy disguised as a feeling. Now think about your own experience of it. Notice how nostalgia rarely shows up when everything is going well. It arrives during a hard week, a lonely evening, a moment of doubt about where your life is headed. That old song, that childhood smell, that photograph you weren't looking for. Your brain isn't randomly indulging in sentiment. It's reaching for the exact evidence you need in that exact moment. Proof that you have survived difficulty before. Proof that connection is something you're capable of having again. This is the twist most people miss entirely. Nostalgia looks backward, but its entire function points forward. It isn't there to keep you stuck in the past. It's there to give you enough stability in the present to keep moving toward whatever comes next. The warmth you feel remembering an old friendship isn't your mind refusing to let go. It's your mind reminding you what belonging feels like so you can recognize it and build it again. So the next time an old song stops you in your kitchen and your chest tightens with something between sadness and comfort, you'll know what's actually happening. It isn't a glitch. It isn't your mind stuck somewhere behind you. It's one of your oldest tools, quietly doing exactly what it was built to do, using proof from your past to steady you for whatever is still ahead. A song came on that you hadn't heard in 15 years, and for a moment your mind wasn't dwelling in the past. It was preparing you, carefully and quietly, for what comes next.